Hello and welcome to this video about interviewing, which is part of the CPD Professional Development video series. I'm happy to spend some time with you talking about interviewing, helping you to feel more prepared and empowered. My name is Amy Klugherz, and I work with the CPD office. I have spent over 30 years coaching individuals from every type of background, law students, people with graduate degrees, people who have been practicing for a long time, people who have worked in blue-collar positions, and everything in between, and every industry. Throughout all of that, some common themes have come out about interviewing, and they don't change on what kind of career you're looking at doing. So today we're going to spend some time figuring out how you can be most comfortable, authentic, and successful in your interviewing. First, I want to talk about what interviewing is ultimately. Interviewing is a conversation between two people, possibly several people on the other side, and you. But it is not a time for you to do a dog and pony show. What it is time for you to do is for you to be authentic and to tell people about yourself so that you can make a connection and build a rapport that leaves both of you saying, yes, this is a good match and we could work well together. That is the focus and the goal in doing interview preparation. The people who are successful in interviewing aren't always going to be the smartest. They're not always going to be the most successful in life overall. What they are going to be, a common theme, is they are going to be prepared and they're going to have practiced. And that's what I hope you will do. And we'll start by learning more about interviewing. Preparing for your interview is a process, and you should start that process many days before the interview. Hopefully you're given at least 5 days before the interview. You don't have any surprises. And if so, I want you to take a little bit of time over those 5 days to truly get prepared. One of the things I hate to see is someone just start to prepare a couple days before the interview or do a mock interview the day before the interview and then not have a good experience, have it not go smoothly, and then their confidence is shaken, and that affects the interview. So really give yourself as much time as possible. To begin in preparing for the interview, clean up your social media feed, your profile. Make sure that it reflects the job that you want and reflects the professional you are. That's a great first step. At the same time, you can look at your profiles to make sure they reflect who you are, particularly your LinkedIn profile, to make sure it reflects all the appropriate and current information. The next thing is review the job description. Now, the truth is, in legal environments, most of our job descriptions aren't that helpful. They are very similar one to the other, because to be a law clerk or a summer associate or a lawyer is pretty similar in most positions. There will be some nuances, but generally the foundation of job descriptions will be very similar. Yet it is important to spend time looking at that job description so that you center yourself in what the employer is looking for and you remind yourself of what the attributes and responsibilities are of the job. So start there. Next, do some research about the organization and those who are interviewing you. Now, I am in the minority in believing that this isn't a place you should spend a lot of time. That is my preference because I don't want you coming in knowing everything. I want you to come in knowing enough that you're interested and questioning so that you can have a real authentic conversation. But at the very least, you should know some fundamentals about the organization, such as the practice groups that the law firm practice. That's a good thing to know so you don't ask questions that may be off the mark. And then for the people that you are meeting with, it does help to know a little bit about them and to know a little bit where you have crossover, where you have common interests, backgrounds, education. That's helpful. But you don't want to go so deep into the information and research that one, you come off as a bit of a stalker about the individual and about the organization, you maybe know too much and you're not as inquisitive. You don't leave room for the interviewer to tell you about their organization and really brag it up. So get to the point of inquisitive and just enough knowledge that you can have a thorough conversation with them and show interest. Then you need to review your resume. And what I recommend is that you review your resume from the top to the bottom, every line, including your name. My last name is Klugherz. I got asked questions about my name in every interview, usually because the interviewer said the name incorrectly. I was able to come up with a little anecdote about my last name that helped to break the ice and to show a little bit more about how I'm quirky and a little bit more about my personality, because my last name happens to mean Weishart in German. And I was able to use that as a jumping off point for building rapport with the interviewers. So every line, what do you want them to know and what could they want to know? Ask those two questions about every line in your resume. If you're someone who doesn't have your address on your resume, what could they want to know about that line where you have your information, your contact information? And then what do you want them to know? Knowing those two questions and answering them will help you do two things. First, if there's something in that line of the resume that they may want to know, you're going to be better prepared to answer that question, to explain what that line says and what it means. The second thing that you'll do is you will be able to understand where you have holes in your resume, to help you to understand where you don't have a good understanding of why you had that item in your resume. The final thing that it helps you understand is it helps you understand what you want them to know. What is it about that line in your resume that is impressive, that moves your candidacy forward? Be prepared to talk about that. So go by line, what do you want them to know and what could they want to know? And then make sure you identify any areas of concern, any areas of dead space in your resume where you don't have good information, any areas of your resume where you feel uncomfortable or feel that leaves you vulnerable. Identify those and then prepare. After you've done that, you've gone from the top to the bottom, you're going to be very much on your way to being prepared for the interview. But the next thing you need to do is to find the common threads of your resume, the common threads of what your strengths are, so that you can narrow down your big selling points, the top 3 to 5 big points of what makes you an ideal candidate for this position. Once you have those, I want you to get out a portfolio, a leather or pleather portfolio that you'll bring with you to your interview, or you'll have in front of you if you're doing a virtual interview. And I want you on the second page of the notepad in that portfolio to write down those 3 to 5 strengths. Not on the top page, because you don't want it to be something that they can see when they're looking across the table if you're in person, but on that second page, so that when you're waiting in the waiting room or waiting for the elevator to go up, you can look at that second page and get those reminders that you're great and that you are worthy of this position. It's a wonderful way to rebuild your confidence and really get ready for that conversation. Next, I want you to find some practice questions to use to practice different ways of answering questions and to get yourself and your brain ready to answer questions about yourself. There are 2 ways that I recommend doing that. The first is, please take advantage of the resources we have available in 1220. Look for practice questions that we have available there. And then also do an AI search, do a Google search, asking AI to come up with questions that are appropriate or are expected of someone interviewing for the type of position you're interviewing for and with the type of employer you're interviewing with. So you want to do that and then use those practice questions to start to warm up and get prepared for the interview. Reflect your use of those questions, having them reflect your personality. Are you someone who has to write out every word so you can get comfortable? Or maybe you have to do an outline. Or maybe it is that you just have to look at them and think about them. Another way that it can work is find someone you trust, who you think cares about you and will also be honest with you, and have them ask you the questions out of order, or different orders, so that you can get used to thinking on your feet and pivoting when a different type of question comes up. Those are important. The last thing about preparing for the interview is that I want you to get ready the area where you'll be doing a virtual interview. If you know that you're doing a virtual interview, figure out what space in your home is ideal for you to do that interview. If you are someone who has pets, even if you believe your pets will be well behaved on the day of, don't believe yourself, because that's when they bark. So find another place to do the interview, or make sure your pets are out of the house. Find a location where you have 1 or 2 things behind you for a virtual interview that are interesting but not distracting. Otherwise, it should be a plain wall. Avoid using a blurring or backdrop, even if provided by Zoom or another online meeting application. Don't trust them. The reason is it tends to blur and to do fuzzy things around your body and your head, which can be very distracting to the interviewer during the interview. Even in the best of backdrops, that can happen. And the blurring out of the background behind you can also be distracting, because we can still see that there's something behind that blurring, and we are spending time being distracted trying to figure out what they are. And if you have somebody else in the house, they can walk behind you, even blurred out, and we're going to know it's there. So either find a location where no one else is going to be around, and make sure that it's quiet and that there are no dogs going to bark. The phone's not going to ring. No one's going to ring the doorbell or knock on the door. Find those locations. And then second, make sure that that background that you're in front of is going to be calm. It's going to be not distracting. And it's only going to have 1 or 2 items of interest behind you. Then you've prepared for the interview. You've done those practice questions. You can also contact CPD to do some interview prep and a mock interview. We'll even set you up with alumni to do mock interviews with you. And then after that, you get ready to start the process of getting ready for the interview. Those last few hours or 24 hours before the interview, some final things that you need to do. First of all, you have to decide what to wear. It doesn't matter how casual the employer is going to be after you get the job. When you're trying to get the job, you're wearing a suit. You need to put your best foot forward and you need to look professional. If you don't have a suit, you don't have to go out and spend hundreds of dollars on a suit. Find either suits that you can use from a friend, or we have a clothing closet here at Mitchell Hamlin. You can utilize that, or use someplace like TJ Maxx or Marshall's and find a way to put a suit together that is affordable for you so you don't break the bank. Also, be prepared on what to bring. You bring that portfolio that I talked about earlier, and within that portfolio, I want you to have a pen and some paper. I want you to have copies of your resume and your cover letter. The job description is helpful to have, and if you have a list of references prepared, which you should have prepared before your interview. Have a couple copies of all those things. 99.9% of the time, you are not going to get asked for any of those things, but that one time you are asked and you don't have them, you are going to feel that you are back on your heels and you are not in charge of the situation. So make sure you have those along. Also remember, particularly for women, that you may be driving to the interview and you're going to have car keys to deal with. What I recommend is that you bring your key fob or the car key that you need to get into your car and just have that and slide it into the front pocket of that portfolio rather than bringing a purse or having a clunky keys in your pocket as you're walking into the interview. That's just enough, just a key to get you back into your car. It helps for me not to have a purse with me. I either forget it in the interviewer's office or it slides off my arm and is awkward when I'm getting seated in the interview, things that can take you off of your mark, and we don't want that. Then also in those days or hours before the interview, figure out where you are interviewing. If it is that you're interviewing virtually online, then make sure you have your place set up of where you're going to interview and you have it set up so that it looks good for you. I once interviewed and I didn't do this, and I actually found out that the desk I was planning on using was broken, and I had to figure out how to make it look not broken for the interview, and I had less than a half an hour to do it. Don't do what I did. Be prepared. Prepare a couple days before the interview, and don't have any surprises. If you're going to the interview somewhere else, it's not your home, it's not your law school, because you can use the different offices here in the law school. We can set you up with a place. There's also study rooms you can use. But if you're not doing any of that and you're actually going to the interview, make sure you know exactly how long it's going to take you to get there, and then add 20 minutes on, maybe even more, to get there early. And there are a couple reasons for that. 1, traffic. 2, if you drive like me, you could get stopped by the cops and have to do a speeding ticket. There are all kinds of things that can happen. Light can be out along the way and you have to do 4-way stop. All kinds of things. Don't be surprised and then have to apologize when you get there. Recently, I was talking to an organization in downtown Minneapolis, and they said that regularly the people they interview are late to the interviews because they have an automated block of elevators, and they cause problems for people getting access to their floor. And it regularly causes interviewees to be late for the interview. Don't be that person. Be prepared, get there early, and then make sure that you can get to the right floor and to the right office on time. So now you're ready for the interview. You're confident because you did practice interview questions. You know that you're worthy of the job, and you have your reminders of that in your portfolio that you're bringing to the interview. Now we get to the day of the interview. Don't try to smash in the middle of appointments or classes interviews. That used to be the old way of doing interviews when we did on-campus interviews, where we would have 20-minute interviews at school in between classes, and it would be a rotation of students into the interview room, one after the other. It was nerve-wracking. And it wasn't easy to go from being in torts class to going into the interview and switching up our minds to be prepared for that. We've changed things now, and some of the improvements will help you. And one of those is you have the opportunity to schedule your day so that you aren't going from one thing to the other and sandwiching in there a very important interview. You need to get emotionally ready for the interview to clear your brain of other things that may be going on around you. You need to take your phone and put it somewhere else so you're not looking at it and it's not buzzing in your pocket. You need to take some time to breathe and to remind yourself of your resume and those 3 to 5 things that are your strengths. Take that time, clear your brain, and get emotionally ready. That may even involve some breathing exercises, and that's good too. Remember to review your core strengths and beef up your attitude and your confidence before you walk in. And then make sure that you arrive early or log in early to the interview if you're doing an online interview. Don't be the last one on, because you want to look like you are prepared and in charge of what is about to happen. The last thing about the day of the interview, before we talk about the interview itself, remember that after the interview, your thank you note should go to the employers that day. We recently prepared people for Court of Appeals and Supreme Court interviews, and were told that there had been times that people had gotten out to their car after interviewing with those two organizations and received a call making an offer to them. That's how quickly things can move. Your thank you note being sent out the day of the interview is important to really close up and seal the deal. So remember that at the end of the interview day that you need to get that thank you note out, and they matter. You can do email thank you notes, that's fine. And handwritten interview or thank yous are also good. And you can always do both if you want to. Now about the interview, the important stuff. How do you do the best at making a good first impression and a good last impression? The first impression is important. I want you to practice your handshake. A weak handshake is a horrible first impression. Practice the handshake and make sure you practice it with people who are going to be honest with you about what your handshake feels like. If you're someone who has a special situation where maybe you can't shake with your right hand, I had a cast on during an interview process. Maybe it's something like that or something more long-term that limits your handshaking. Just be prepared on how to make that transition where you don't make the other person feel uncomfortable that you can't shake a hand. And then make sure your handshake is firm. Next, lean into the handshake. Don't lean back. Don't be rigid. Lean in. It is a way of welcoming and showing that you're open to the connection. And then finally, make direct eye contact and a smile. Even if you can't get the courage and the reminder to smile any other time in the interview, smiling at that beginning starts to warm everything, and it sets the tone for the rest of the interview. Next, be prepared for the different types of questions. And as we walk into this part of preparing and actually interviewing, I want to remind you of this. When you are interviewing virtually, online, you can leave little reminders for yourself on the camera, on your computer screen, that will help you along the way. If you aren't a natural smiler, not someone who smiles a lot, put a smiley face next to the camera lens. Also, put Post-it notes on either side of the camera lens to remind you that is your audience, not the screen. It's that camera lens, so that it has that way of fooling all of us into believing we're talking to one another. And you can leave other notes on the camera too, or on your computer screen. Remind yourself of things that maybe are weaknesses in how you interview, or remind yourself of a strength that you particularly want to bring up during the interview. Now, types of questions. I'm going to put types of questions down to 3 types. First, resume review. This is a weak way of people to do interviews. It usually indicates someone who has not been put through a process of designing interview questions, and they are kind of doing it free form. What they may do is to point to something on your resume and say, tell me about it. It's really quite simple. And it helps you in that you can go back to all of that prep you did. What do you want them to know, and what could they want to know, and answer that question. It gives you control of highlighting what you want them to know. So that's resume review. And then there's what I call random. They just come up with random questions that they're going to ask you about. For example, it was very popular when I was interviewing to ask, what was the last book you read? Many law students will reply with, I don't read books for pleasure anymore because I'm reading for study all the time. And that's an okay answer, as long as you then hook with it and talk about your study habits and make it into a positive about why you do so much reading for school and what your process looks like to make sure you're super prepared for class and you're learning the content. Remember that everything you talk about should have something in it, some little message that helps to move along your candidacy. So random questions you can't really prepare for. You can't really know what that person is going to think about and come up with as a question. They may be a Lord of the Rings fan and they ask you a question about Lord of the Rings. How are you supposed to prepare for that? It's okay. You don't have to have a perfect answer for everything. If they ask you something you don't know, take a pause. Think about it. Look down and to the right. Keep your gaze close to the person asking the question or close to the camera, and just think for a second. If you need more time, use some sort of hedge language that tells them you're thinking about it, you're not stunned. Something like, that is a really great question. I need to think about that for a second, and then come back. You can buy the time, and it can be imperfect. You can say something like, I don't have an example of that, or I don't actually like Lord of the Rings, although I've heard great things about it. I did see the movies, but I am more someone who appreciates this kind of film. It's okay to talk about that. And then why do you want to tell them about that type of film? What is it you want to say about that moves your candidacy forward? The last kind of question is behavior-based interview question, which has had a life of its own for many, many years and can be something that really trips people up. This last year, the Supreme Court of Minnesota actually used only behavior-based interview questions. And that was really tricky for some people. But here's what a behavior-based interview question is. And then soon I'll tell you how you get through them. A behavior-based interview question is one that asks you to recall something in your past. It can be bad or it can be good. It can be neutral. But what they're trying to do is to find out something from your past that will indicate what you may do in the future, how you may react to something in the future. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to have the greatest memory of all time. They're asking you to identify one thing that you can then explain either through the story itself or by building a bridge of what that story means. You're building a bridge into what they can think and believe you will do or act like in the future if something like that happened again. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So, techniques for solid answers. There are multiple ways that you can answer questions. Ultimately, you have to do the ways that are confident and authentic to who you are. But here are some options. I have seen law students and non-law students go meandering around an answer because someone gives them an open-ended question. That happens with random questions and resume questions where they just ask you something off your resume. What it does is it can trip up some of us that talk too much or can meander through answers. And we need to lock that down. We need to put bookends on our answers. 2 reasons. 1, so we don't go on forever. And 2, because we want to have a primary answer or content that we want the person listening to remember. And if you go on forever and meander around without a sequence of your answer and a line to the conclusion, then you lose them. And they don't know what to listen to, and they can't keep up trying to take notes of things that are actually quality things they want to know about you. So I'm going to take you back to law school class, to your writing section. I want you to eye-rack your answers. If you are someone who meanders, who can have really long answers, eye-rack your answer. They've asked you a question. What do you want them to know? And go and tell them what that is. That can be the I and the R. What is it that you want them to know? And then go into the analysis. Give them some sort of reminiscing about something that has happened or why you do that particular thing or you've told them that particular thing. That's the analysis. And then conclude with what you want them to know. So some form of eye-racking, if you are somebody who meanders, will help you to lock it down and get to the point. And also have a message that they'll be able to identify as the message you want them to know. Next, the STAR approach. This isn't an approach I use, but it is popular. The Minnesota Supreme Court did use it this year. You can find lots of information about it. There's books about it. It's called STAR. And that is claim the situation. So tell the person the situation that you were in, the task that you had to accomplish, so what your role was in the situation, the action you did to complete that task, and then the result. How'd it go? Was it successful? That's called STAR. And if you use STAR and you're doing practice questions and you have somebody who is doing practice questions with you, let them know that you're using STAR so that they can hold you accountable to use that sequence as you're outlining your answer. The form of answering that I use often for behavior-based interview questions, and by the way, STAR is used for behavior-based interview questions the most, what I use is spinning. And what that is I want you to be authentic with your answer. If they ask you about something not good, like what's your greatest weakness, or tell me about a time you failed, be authentic. Now, I don't want you to be on the gates of heaven authentic, absolutely 100% honest. I want you to be first date authentic. You want to tell them something that is true, authentic, and real, but you don't have to lay out your whole heart and all of your flaws. Bring up something that is applicable and relevant. And by doing that, you'll be authentic. But I want you to claim it. I want you to be clear about it. I don't want you to sugarcoat it. And then I want you to spin it. What did you do to take responsibility for what went wrong? What were you responsible for something that went right? How did you communicate about the situation? How did you make sure it never happened again? And what did you learn about it? And by providing those pieces of information, you are being authentic and true even when things went wrong, even when you have weaknesses. And then you are saying, I have control of this, I am a professional, and I took responsibility and have learned from it, and I will act the same if anything ever goes wrong or right in your organization. I call that spinning. Finally, don't bury the headline. If you are asked a direct question, whether that's a random question or it's something specific about your resume, even if it is something that is a behavior-based interview question, don't bury the headline. What do you want them to know? And start with that. That can be your issue if you're using the IRAC method. Tell them what you want them to know. And then go into supporting that answer with either stories or facts about what you've done. All right, so those are techniques for solid answers. Let's go to the next part, after the interview. We've already discussed, get those thank yous out that day. They can be handwritten, but really sending an email the day of is important, and you can do handwritten notes later, particularly if you are dealing with interviewers who are over the age of 50. It is actually kind of a nice touch, and they may find that a good touching point. And I can say that because I'm over 50. Next, when do you follow up? Remember, your interview is one part of that person's day, and you are one candidate amongst many. Hopefully not too many, but amongst many. So you have to balance how frequently and when you follow up with that information. Give them some time. It is good when you're asking questions at the end of the interview and have some prepared, that you ask a question such as, what does the remainder of this interview and selection process look like? So that they will give you a timeline. And then don't, if they say it's I'll let you know in the next week. Don't in the next week on the 5th day in the morning, send them an email or follow up. Give them a little bit of grace, maybe an extra day after a week. Give them some time. Don't seem over eager, but you do need to follow up if you haven't heard anything. Also, you want to make sure that you do not stalk them on social media. I've had people that I've interviewed, and then before I got home from my workday, they had sent me a LinkedIn invitation or a friend invitation on Facebook or followed me on Instagram. All of that is great, but that timing is a little too close and may be a little too much. So don't do that. It could put the interviewer in an awkward situation. I would wait until after the interview process is done. But it is okay to go on social media and check out information about them. Just don't try to friend them or to link with them until after the process is over. Next, tell your network. If you know people who are connected to the employer that you are interviewing with, you should have told them that you were interviewing long before the interview. But if you haven't, or if you have, and now it is now time to follow up with them. One way or the other, any part of your network that works and is connected with where you are going to interview, you need to let them know, because they may be the nice little nudge that gets you over that finish line with that employer. One more thing about thank yous. When you are doing a thank you, I used to think they were worthless. I didn't understand why we had to do them. They're formulaic and it didn't do anything for me. But then I screwed up at an interview and I used my thank you note to explain what I did a poor job of explaining during the interview. I also use thank you notes to connect with someone. If it's a panel interview where I've seen multiple people, so I have 3 or 4 interviews in the same organization in a day, I use the thank you note to remind them of a connection we made. You don't want to make it too trite, like, great to see we're both Vikings fans, but it may be that you had a moment in the interview where you really connected, or they asked you a question that you really thought was thoughtful. You can remind them of that in the interview, and it may help you to stand out amongst your competitors for that job. One more thing. You have prepared for this. You are worthy of this, and you have skills to provide. The interview is not for you to be perfect. You can make mistakes. But ultimately, what you need to do is to make sure you're authentic, you're prepared, and that you remember that you are worthy of the job. And then after that, getting some things wrong, like an or a long pause before an answer, is just part of the process. You're human. So are the people who are interviewing you. And they're not trying to trip you up. They're trying to get to know you. So go in and show them your best self and make sure that you come to see us in CPD so we can help you do that.